Now to introduce our featured speaker, General Darren McDew. General McDew's service in the U.S. military spans 36 years and culminated in his appointment as the 12th commander of the U.S. Transportation Command. And in this capacity, General McDew served as a combatant commander, reporting to the Defense Secretary. It was a senior uniformed officer responsible for global air, land, and sea transportation and patient movement for the DoD. And since receiving a commission and graduating pilot training, General McDew has completed many unique assignments to include the White House, Pentagon, Capitol Hill, and as a VP in a Fortune 500 company. General McDew also serves as an independent director on a few corporate boards, but today he joins us as our 2021 IDB Executive Fellow. So IDB alums, please welcome our very distinguished and humble person who enjoys engaging with leaders like you. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Sabrina. And of course, distinguished translates to old. That's all that means, and I get it completely. But thank you, Nwer, for that wonderful introduction. I am really glad to be here with you today. I'd rather be with you in person. I am, in fact, an analog kind of person, and I have limited Zoom skills. And I'm going to try to find gallery view again. Okay. And I'm sorry for whatever you're seeing of me right now. It is not my fault. It was Sabrina and the team at IDB that made you look at me like this. A couple things. I'm going to start off with a few remarks just to prime the pump and to get us thinking about some questions you might ask. And I looked at many of your questions and they are very, very good. I'm also stalling because a few of them I don't want to answer because they're very, very hard. No, I'm kidding. I will give my best shot at it. Leading through the challenges of our time is kind of what I want to talk about very quickly. Let me start with something I'm good at. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much to IDB for having such a well thought out and robusted program. I look forward to engaging with you. Think of this. You are the ones we've been waiting for. So I want to thank you for being who you are and for what you in fact do every single day, because you're helping us right now, leading through the challenges of our time. That particular phrase has been a focus for me the entirety of my life, not just the 36 years I spent in uniform, and it's still a focus for me today. And I ask myself a series of questions. One, what are the challenges? Many times, we solve the wrong problem because we don't ask the right question. What is the time? What's the time period we're dealing with? It's not our grandparents' time or our parents' time. It is, in fact, our time. And then what is leading me in that time and under those challenges? These are big questions I always ask myself, and I try to put the lens on it, but not my lens, but of my boss's lens to the best of my ability. Now, why do I do that? It's because it stretches me. It stretches me in a way to get out of my thinking and helps me to possibly unshackle my brain. And I'll talk about what that means to me. And if I don't, please ask me what unshackling your brain means. It's not just through my experience and my perspective, because I can be skewed, and we all as human beings can be skewed in our perspectives. So I have to first know who I am and believe in who I'm not and understand why my perspective is what it is. Well, some of you I know were at LogTech and I said that I'm a 1960 vintage American. It makes me who I am. It is what it is. I grew up where segregated schools were kind of in vogue and normal throughout the country. I was blessed to be a part of the DoD schools that were integrated. And what that allowed me to do was to escape separate but equal. And it allowed me to get an equal and a robust education from the Department of Defense schools who were actually complying with the law of the land. What a concept. And that shaped me early on. I also know that I was shaped early in my life by the Vietnam War. Watching POWs return home in a C-141 landing at Traverse Air Force Base, broken and no longer the people they once were, but the people they were very proud to be home, very proud to land on the ground in America, and many of them actually kissed the ground. Most of them could barely maneuver themselves off the airplane. All of them wanted to salute the senior member of the party that was greeting them. even before they got to their families. And even with broken and busted shoulders, they mustered the best salute they could. That shaped me. The civil rights struggle shaped me, although I was living overseas at the time, because I came back to Virginia and Georgia, who were still, you would think, in the height of the civil rights struggle, because they were still denying integration. And so I got a chance to be in integrated schools, and then segregated schools, and then integrated schools, and then segregated schools again 3 times in my young life. So I know who I am, but I also know who I'm not. I'm not a warm, fuzzy guy. And there's a bunch of honorable youth on this call, and I'd asked for the VMI graduates to not be allowed on, but you guys let them on anyway, because nothing ruins a good war story like an eyewitness. And but they can tell you I'm not a warm, fuzzy guy, but I know that about myself, and that's why I put thank you up front in my presentations. But that background also says to me that integrity matters to me, and lies are lies, and I'm really irrational when it comes to someone who can look me in the eye, know it's wrong, and lie to me, no matter who tells it to me. And it's not less of a lie if I like you than it is if I like you. It's still a lie. I expect myself to live up to a high standard. I don't always reach it, but I expect myself to be there. And why? Because I took an oath 100 years ago, an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Those 17 words at the core of an oath that goes longer, they become part of my core over a long period of time. And that's kind of who I am. Yesterday, I had a chance to talk to the American Society of Military Colleges and Schools, and I talked to them about what they were teaching our young people, the bold step. And they have phrases at their schools like leaders of character, character above all, start here, go anywhere, live, learn, lead. It all starts here, and eager to learn, ready to serve. And they provide an education, challenges, honor, integrity, duty, and service, and self-discipline that is in high demand around the world and in our country, but in very much low supply, but in great demand. They get a chance to hone those transferable skills, and they build a whole person, and they expose them to that higher standard. And through that process, I gained my own self-confidence. I became somewhat arrogant about my ability to do things. Why? Because I learned that my limits that I thought I had before were self-inflicted. And I also learned that if I was part of a team, we could achieve much more than I could as an individual. That is how I am value programmed. My limits are self, and the team can always do much better. But let's look at our time. So we looked at some of the challenges that I face, but what about our time? Time magazine called 2020 the year you'd never want to revisit. There have been worse years in our history. There have been worse years in the history of the world, but most of us alive have not seen a year as traumatic, and our kids and some of our young people have not seen anything close to it. But guess what? We're still here. But a lot of people throughout the world have had loss of loved ones and connection. They've lost special events, businesses, homes, and their health. It's an important thing to remember as we shape what is the challenge of our time. But a mature person like me, translated again old, thanks Sabrina, is just grateful to be here. But what about our young people? How are they value programming? They are learning something through this tumultuous 2020, but I think we are letting them sometimes learn the wrong lessons, and we as adults are learning the wrong lessons. 2020 was a great time to reflect for me. COVID, the most polarized electorate I've seen in my lifetime, with a clash of interests, racial strife. I've never seen anything up close as traumatic as this and divided as this. What's made it worse? We have lacked sufficient statesmen, and those people who are willing to be selfless servants, devoted to democracy and our Constitution. And not the Constitution they interpret it to be, but the actual document. We are allowed to sometimes build our own echo chambers that make us more susceptible to disinformation, misinformation, and outright lies. What is that doing to our young people? What are they learning? And I even challenge what their parents are teaching them and what they've learned themselves. We have a chance to be role models. Whether we want to or not, I still get asked questions about things in life, and I try to be an informed participant in the dialogue. Again, certain values are high in demand. Some people say they have them, but they're short in supply. I am not perfect. Please don't take anything I've just said to mean that I think I'm perfect and I get it right every single time. Absolutely not. But that foundation, that 80-word oath, that entire thing that I said 100 years ago, reminds me that I took the time in 2020 to reread the Constitution. It's not that long. It's a worthy read. I reread the Bill of Rights. I wanted to be an informed part of the electorate because people ask me about pandemics. They ask me about diversity and equal rights. They ask me about impeachment. And you'd be amazed at the person on the street who will ask you about an impeachment because they saw it on, you name the station, CNN or Fox. And what was interpreted for them is not actually what the document says. And it's pretty easy to read, not all that easy to understand, but at least you can read it for yourself. So I point to the actual Constitution. I point to our ideals. I point to our aspirations, because that's what that is all about. It's aspirations of a few people a few hundred years ago that brings us to today. Now, what about our time? Globalization. It's here. It's much different than it ever was. 100 years ago, when I started my military journey, we had one enemy. It was the USSR. And I sat on alert in Strategic Air Command, waiting for the big one to happen, knowing that one day I would have to fight this massive force-on-force effort against USSR. Today, there are three global powers. The US, China, who's on the rise, and Russia, who many would say is on decline. And I would say in decline. And I would say that that's probably a worse position for us to have them in, because a cornered person who wants to still be at the top is a terrible foe to have. We must rely on our friends and allies because we're still the only superpower in the world. And I define that as someone who can reach and influence an enemy's near abroad at the time of our choosing. China is trying to get there. Russia thinks it's there. We're the only one that can do it on demand. And that makes us different. So the challenges, the world is no longer binary. That's that complex world I thought I grew up in, where Russia was our big enemy. I thought that was more challenging than I could ever imagine. Well, today it's not that easy. There is gray zone conflict. People think we're at peace, but I'm not sure what we've been doing for the last 75 plus years, because 1942 was the last time the United States declared war. 1942, Romania. So what have we been doing since 1942? We've been at undeclared war in my mind, because we haven't decided that that binary world that we forced ourselves into no longer exists. Cyber, we have not defined what is war in cyberspace. What is espionage? We've not tackled disinformation, misinformation, or lies that may tear us down from within or without. We have adversaries that are poking us because we allow them through our echo chambers to influence us. The enemy is, in fact, foreign and domestic. We need more than the Department of Defense. We need congressional focus on not just big budgets and defense, but on national security, which brings into things more than DoD, but commercial industry as well. Before I was fired from my last job as a Transcom commander, I had introduced a concept called my fourth component. I had an Army component in the command, I had an Air Force component, and a Navy component. But I said the fourth component is commercial industry, because as much of my readiness, as much of my capacity came from commercial industry as it did from the uniformed side. And we talk about the defense industrial base. Those are the people that make things for us. But we've gotten ourselves to a point where there's many people in the commercial world that do things for us, and we should not take that for granted, and how important that is to national security. So our challenges going forward, some might say it's something like COVID, a global pandemic. Well, maybe. I say it's the next unknown. It's not the known, it is the unknown. And there was a term called DIME that we used to use a lot of, diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic. Those were strengths and lenses we use to look at the next unknown and not just fight the past known. One of my favorite quotes, and the folks from LogTech have heard this already: this nation was built by men who took risks, pioneers who were not afraid of the wilderness, businessmen who were not afraid of failure, scientists who were not afraid of the truth, thinkers who were not afraid of progress, and most importantly, dreamers who were not afraid of action. And that came from a theater critic in 1920, Brooks Atkinson. Thereby, he didn't say "and women" because even in 1920, we didn't treat women as though they were actual people yet. But that's the quote. And I'm proud of what you do to move us forward every single day. And the bottom line is we have to lead boldly. With integrity and service to others, we have to lead boldly. With the excellence of a higher standard, we must lead boldly. We never should allow ourselves to be satisfied with where we are today. We have to be those pathfinders still. We have to be those visionaries. We have to find the dreamers. And we still have to be able to see the possibilities. And the world, believe it or not, still believes in us. The United States of America is still a place and a destination for everybody around the world because they believe in our ideals, sometimes more than we do. We face challenges. Every generation has. Every generation has prevailed to this point, and we will too, because we must. Just like they did, we must. Public service is noble, and our cause is just and right, and I'm glad to join you and continue fighting as long as I can. All right, well, thank you, and let me get my brow sweated off here so I can take your questions because I know they're tough.
Thank you, sir. Well, as a distinguished guest, it comes with distinguished insights too, right? So we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. And I've been getting some already directly to me and also in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and kick off with David's question. So one of the casualties in 2020 is the trust in our institutions. What can we do to rebuild that trust?
You know, it takes a minute to tear it down. It takes a long time to build it up. What we've got to do is you fight it with truth. Tearing down institutions is easy because you can poke holes. If any of you have ever seen, have you been subjected to someone saying something about you that's not true? How long does it take to repair that untruth? That's our problem. So it goes back to education. I honestly believe we've got to review what does it mean to be a citizen in this country? And we shouldn't let a left or the right define it. We should define it back to the foundational documents and the ideals that we espouse. And that's where we get back to the institutions again.
Thank you for that. So I have one that's anonymous, and it's given recent events and challenges for both active and reserve components, at what point should the U.S. military analyze, plan, or craft doctrine to address the domestic side of all enemies, foreign and domestic?
We're probably past due. That's one of those unseen, unknown, unpredictable things. And I say we because I have still a pronoun problem. This blue jacket I have on might as well be my blue service dress. This blue shirt could be my blue service dress because I still think in those pronouns. We knew there were issues. We addressed it individually because we saw some units that had a problem with respect. We saw some units that had problems with extremism, but we did not take it on collectively as we have a problem. We now know collectively we have a problem. I believe the Joint Chiefs now are addressing it. And I know that old guys like me are being asked to participate in how do we get after this problem. Now it's a problem. It should be a line of effort.
Well, so that people aren't just listening to my voices, I'd love to open up the podium or stage to the audience as well. So James, I know you.
Can we not open it up to any graduates of the Virginia Military Institute class?
I will try my best,
okay,
but unfortunately, I don't know who those individuals are, so cannot guarantee that part of it. James, do you want to ask your question on camera, can you? Or at least by voice?
No, I didn't have a question, Sabrina. I was just well, hello, first of all. I was just I didn't know the person, I don't know who it was. They put the comment in there, so I didn't know it was a question. I thought it was to everyone. I didn't know it was to the general. So I just answered it. You know me, I just answered it. So
go ahead, say it. We'd like for this to be a discussion.
So yeah, so what he said, yeah, I'll talk, I'll talk. Okay. So no, I think, so you hit the nail on the head. You talk about integrity, and and how do you lose trust? And it's from the lies, from the integrity. And I think, I mean, I'm not a big political person, but I can just kind of just speak from my foxhole. Kind of like what I see is we've lowered the standard. We made things acceptable that weren't normally, I don't have a time frame. Like, I'm always trying to think, like, when did things like start to shift? But I was talking to some people I worked the other day, talking about just the military, for example. Like, when did the Army start to decline? And we kind of all agreed on when we stopped having to shine boots and press our uniform, right? Because you have this standard of discipline that was like in place for everyone, and you had people that didn't comply, but it's kind of like a small thing, but it's so huge, because you can look and see who the dirtbags were. I mean, honestly, I'll just be honest, right? Like, but when you take that standard of discipline out and everyone can just be whoever and do whatever, like, you don't know what you get. And it sucks to say that perception is reality, but there is some level of truth to that. Yeah. And when you take that truth, that discipline away, then you blur the lines. So
James, I'm just checking out your name there. Yes. I agree with you to an extent, and I'll add this caveat: every generation has felt the same way. Every single one, yeah, has felt that the generation, the next, doesn't have the same discipline, character, integrity. Now, with that being said, I agree with you that things have started to slip. And I always ask myself this question: are we actually who we say we are? And have we ever been? A lot of organizations that I've led, they have and even companies now that I'm on the corporate board for, they have a color glossy and they have a website that says who they say they are. And then there's who they actually are. That's why I call the Constitution aspirational. That's why I call the Bill of Rights aspirational. I found it easy, like you said, to find the exceptional people when we shined boots and pressed uniforms. Because those were people willing to put the exceptional work into those things. But not every one of them put the exceptional work into all things.
Right.
And then there were people that I knew that didn't put the time to iron and press and polish with Brasso, but had exceptional integrity. So it's always been a delicate dance. But how do you put in, and you've heard the broken window theory, all of those things put together, we just can't lose them. We can't allow certain things to become normal. Like calling people names in a public forum should never be normal. Highlighting and idolizing people because they make a lot of money and they're famous for being famous shouldn't become normal. We should only elevate folks who have the types of values that we think we want as a society. And let's agree on what those are. Right now, we're arguing on the margins. I say we can all agree that we all believe in democracy. We all believe in freedom. We all believe that everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. That's what our documents say. On the margins, we get into arguments about either Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter. Why can't they both matter? Why does it have to be one or zero? There is an area in between.
Humans matter.
What's that?
Humans matter.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, let's see. Well, I have a question from Walter. Would welcome you to ask it yourself if you would like.
Sure, ma'am. Hey, this is Walt Reed from U.S. Transcom. General McDew, I worked for you for a number of years.
I'm sorry.
My question to you
Walter,
is,
Walter, your audio's coming in a bit tough. It's unclear, so.
okay, 1 second.
Okay.
And Walter, I remember you, by the way.
Yes, sir. So my question to you is, with the sector calling for a national stand down to discuss extremism within the ranks, what would be a first step that you would think of that we should take to try to root out extremism within the ranks of the DoD?
Yeah, so it's a hard thing. As I was getting ready for this particular talk, I called out to a bunch of young people who used to work from here, now medium-sized to old people, who are out there still leading in the effort. And I asked them what challenges they're facing. One of the things we need is a standard. What will no longer be tolerated? And just say it emphatically. The Marine Corps has stepped out in some areas that the other services have yet to step out on. And I went to school with a lot of well-meaning, wonderful human beings. And at the time, the Confederate flag was used at the Virginia Military Institute as a sign of Southern heritage. Well, that flag was co-opted by a bunch of people to mean hate and dissension and turmoil. Admit it. You can't hold on to something that has now been co-opted, period. And so we have to be able to say those things. And to get out extremism, what are those extremist views that we will no longer tolerate, and just say it. And that's the beginning. We've been dancing around it for about 4 years now. So let's stop dancing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
I just have a comment on that. What you just said about the extremist views. Some of the views that. So I'll tell a story, right? So my commander, 05, we were on a conference call, and this is at the height of COVID. This is back in March, and we were trying to plan his hail and farewell, and of course everything's closed. No one wanted to go to a restaurant, and there's an individual that we work with that has a house, lots of land, and half the staff is other than white, right? I'll just say that. So he made the comment. The commander made the comment and he said, "Can't we just go to this person's last name and reference plantation after this person's name?" Right. So it's not extremist by no means, but it's a viewpoint. So I started texting during the conference call with others, well, someone needs to say something. Chief, are you going to say something? I'm like, we've been battling this for a long time. I'm just going to just let it go. They're like, we don't think you. I got, pin and tail on me, which is fine. I'll do it. So I'll call him afterwards, and I said, "You know what, sir?" I said, "You said something on the conference call. I'm not mad. I'm not upset by what you said, because I've heard these things before, in certain channels. But I said, if you ever look at the news like right now and you wonder why Black America or other than white America is so mad, it's because they work next to people that say things like plantation on a conference call and don't even realize what they're saying or doing." So when we talk about the extremist views, yeah, you could put a policy in place, but I think it really comes with just candid conversation. And we talked for maybe like 30 minutes about the whole thing. And he said, it takes a lot of guts to call your boss and say something like that. But you did it professionally, you did it calmly. And, we were able to come to this, not agreement, but the discussion.
And understanding it.
Understanding, right. And I said, sir, well, look, I said, I understand what you're saying, but the real change doesn't happen with me talking to you. So the real change happens with you when you're in your circles with your buddies and your friends, and someone else says that, and you chop that down. And I said, if you don't do that, then your apology in this conversation doesn't mean anything. Not to me, but it doesn't mean anything to you, because you're not honoring what you just told me.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, yeah. There's policy. You can put a policy in place for anything, but a lot of it just comes with just being human and just being willing to have the conversation. I think that's the most important. Just have the conversation and just be willing to understand and come to some sort of resolution or just understand it.
I agree. Another caveat. In a hierarchical organization like the military, you've got to reshape the boundaries or the conversation can't happen. If the boundaries are set in a place that most people believe it's okay for those kind of that dialogue to happen, you know, that to be okay, then no one will have the conversation because you haven't reset the boundaries. The other is the majority of people are wonderful human beings. And when they make statements like that, it's a mistake. It's not a willful intent, the vast majority. And I found that many people are just confused. And I'll take you back to 100 years ago when I was a youngster. I was confused about what I was supposed to be called. Okay? When I first was born, I was colored. And that was fine. Now, it was only fine because that was accepted because that was what was given to us. And then I became a Negro. We assumed that term, Negro, that was better than being called colored. And then we were Black because that was better than being a Negro. And then we're African American because we wanted to assimilate into what a number of cultures said about their heritage in this country. But that was less articulate because not every person that's brown or Black is an African American. So now we talk more of people of color and we talk about totality. So you see, so imagine you're outside that circle and listening to that dialogue and that conversation through those generations. And now you're going, what do I call them? How do I interact? So you could, them, right? So if you, believe it or not, there are places in this country still where people in the majority can live their entire lives without interacting with anybody in the minority, the majority of their life, from schools to workplace to home and church. And so it is not a willful intent for many. It is a really benign negligence, ignorance. And so that conversation you had is one we ought to have more often. And we've got to have an environment that allows the conversation to happen without people being condemned for just having the conversation, if they want to have a conversation to learn and grow. Then there are people that have conversations that are just still to incite and indict, and that shouldn't be acceptable. Sorry for the length of that answer, but.
No, this is fantastic. It's needed and it's great. So I'd like to just go down the list and take the next person who has a question up. Chris Ford, would you like to ask yours in person as well over video or over the phone?
I guess not.
I will ask it for him then. Okay. So the idea of the fourth component is really inclusive and needed. Let me scroll down, sorry. Something the Air Force has embraced, and I think the total force structure. Yet we also see a tendency to defer industry and the commercial structure for our solutions. In an era of globalization, is there something to be said for developing organic capability in order to ensure that capability is available when needed?
Yeah, it's very, very important. So let me explain. If I explain to you why I use the term fourth component and how I came up with it and how I developed it at Transcom, it might give you an insight into how I think about the answer. There are people that believe that commercial industry wants money from the Department of Defense. They're not wrong. The people in commercial industry are not there for altruistic reasons. They're there to make a profit for their shareholders. Fine. There's also a part of the DoD that gave up capability in some of the downsizing. Did we give up the right capability? That's a question that maybe have been answered. And what you're suggesting is that should we bring some of that back in-house? So the question is, what capabilities are core to the US military and what capabilities can be outsourced? That balance has shifted too far to some things being outsourced that we need to be insourced, but we can't go back and get some things that are no longer effective or efficient for the DoD to do. There's a battle, there has been a battle, there will continue to be a battle as budgets wage, but the question has to be the right question. What is core to the US military? and what things are on tangential to that core that we must retain in order to be the most effective fighting force going forward.
Does anyone have a response to that or an additional question to play off of that?
I'd push back on me myself. I would.
So Brandon, this is Peter Battaglia. So, hey, sir, I'm from Defense Logistics Agency, current student at Eisenhower after going through the LogTech MBA. So I'll push back a little bit on that in terms of military providing national security. What's a core element on there, especially with the broadening of definition in terms of national security. As we've seen, public health is now considered national security element, and to what extent should the military have a role in there? More specifically, when you're looking at traditional military operations, right? Part of what we were looking at was doing the counter-piracy operations off Somalia and everywhere there. And one of the more successful elements of those operations was actually by effectively hiring mercenaries, Blackwater, things along those lines. So in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, all of those operations were shown to be more effective and efficient by going through mercenary operations. So one could make the extensive argument that we should not have a standing military, that we should just contract out to mercenaries. And I think that everyone in this room is probably uncomfortable with that idea. But I mean, you know, taking your position, what is actually a core element of the military, and especially in terms of national security?
Yeah, that's you know, we could have an entire degree granting program. Actually, we do have entire degree granting programs on this very subject. And there are lots of different elements, and I don't think there's anyone wrong, other than I'm personally not in favor of outsourcing the entire military to mercenaries. I'll have to get that on the record. The other, I know you are too. The other piece I would add is that national security, where we are today, is not the sole, DoD is not the sole proprietor of national security. It is too broad and is too big, and it should be more encompassing than we have thought of national security before, which has been all about DoD, why we have $730 billion budgets in the DoD, and other people can't even afford to run a mediocre sized organization. So what does it mean? What does core mean? A lot of times when we ask ourselves that question, we do things because we can, not because we should. And if you really back down the Department of Defense and say, what is it you should be doing versus what you can do? We have, how many air forces do we have? You don't have to ask a rhetorical question. How many navies do we have? Rhetorical again. How many transportation systems do we have? Another rhetorical question. There are a lot of cans versus shoulds. And then outside the Department of Defense, how do we take care of the nation medically? For example, in my past life, I was in charge of global patient movement for the Department of Defense. I could have told you a few years ago when I was sitting in that seat that every flu season, the entire hospital system in the United States is almost filled to capacity. That a war started during flu season would be catastrophic for us in bringing home ill and wounded. Why? Because we shut down a bunch of military hospitals. That totality of that picture was not viewed when we were shutting down the military military hospitals, because we don't think that way. Now we see with the global pandemic that turned out to be a little larger than the average flu, that the emergency rooms and the ICUs were maxed out. And so that becomes a national security issue, but not necessarily something the military should take more on, but it should be talked about in national security circles. The other, in my other life, transportation. If you want to fight us in a war, here's how I would fight us. I would take us on during the Christmas holidays and a bad flu season. Why? Amazon takes all the airlift, much of the sea lift capacity, because you would not even blink an eye. You would go up in arms if you didn't get your whatever it is overnight from Amazon Prime. And they've got their own airline now, and they already were taking up a bunch of capacity. And then we couldn't recover with the hospitals with the flu season going on. Put those two things together, and we've got a hot mess on our hands.
Hey, sir.
Go ahead, Fish.
Yeah, Ted Sturgeon here. So I want to jump on that because I had a question. So national, the latest strategy and whatnot is that we are going to be well deployed, disseminated, dispersed. We need a resilient, robust, flexible supply chain.
Okay, whose strategy is this one?
No, I'm talking specifically Marine Corps, but
okay,
globally, I mean, across the department, it's a diverse, based on the threat. We want a dispersed, distributed military, and so my reading of that is that we're going to be, and I put it in the chat, heavy reliance on host nation, heavy reliance on private sector in terms of supply chain for resilience and for flexibility, et cetera, whether it's in industrial parts or it's, beans, bullets, and band-aids and that kind of thing. So my question is, and this really to your Amazon point and to the point of the holidays and the flu season, how viable do you think that strategy really is in terms of kinetic operations, war, as opposed to a peacetime deployments?
That is made of unobtainium. If you have, first of all, if you can tell me when peace and war are, you're talking about deployment versus a declared war. A declared war with a national emergency is a different system. We haven't seen that since 1942. In the environment we're living in today, it is very tough to take that service strategy, and many of the services have one similar to that, by the way.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, they all have one very similar to that don't actually match up with the national military strategy or the defense strategy or the national security strategy. They're kind of under there, but no one delves into that except the poor guy sitting out at U.S. Transportation Command. What it means to me is that we don't have enough resources to do that at every level for every service. What we've got to be able to do, that's why the fourth component became so important to me, because I knew unless I convinced the congressional committees that handled transportation and infrastructure that I could not move the 82nd Airborne or the 3rd ID or anybody across the roads in this country or the bridges in this country. I couldn't rely on enough commercial shipping in this country. For example, back in Shield and Storm, 1,500 ships per day were sailing across the world under the U.S. flag. We don't have that many. There are like 80 total companies in the world that fly the U.S. flag versus 1,500 ships. And so that's why what you said is a very, very astute question that needs an answer that goes back to the broader discussion about national security. If you go back, if you're really bored one day and you can't sleep, go back and listen to my last 3 testimonies. And it'll put you, first of all, it'll knock you right out. But in there, we line out some of those things that we as a nation need to think about. Are we a maritime nation still or not? Does things like the craft that brings in the commercial airlines and such, is it still important? Amazon's not part of it, the last time I checked. And they now have their own airline, and they were tapping into much of the craft. Those are the kinds of things that we need to look at broadly as a nation about what does it mean. And then if we look at what is the national policy on allies and partners. Prior to 2016, we had a strategy that we relied on NATO We relied on allies and partners in Germany and Great Britain and Australia. We didn't put as much emphasis in those areas over the last 4 years because we were focusing on America first. And what I would tell you is America first, there's nothing wrong with an America first policy, but it can never be America alone. And I'm not saying it did, but we have to put the emphasis on the rest of what America first means, because America alone just won't work.
No, thanks, sir. That's exactly the the maritime strategy that the Navy's been talking about for at least a half dozen years. It's the same kind of thing, which is robust presence, but it's very much a combined presence.
Right, and the Navy, I will tell you right now, and this is not just the Navy. I'm just having to pick on the Navy because you just brought that up. The Navy doesn't want to build supply ships. They want to build combatant ships, and so would I if I was a CNO. Just like the Air Force doesn't want to build air fueling tankers. They want to build fighters. And the Army wants to build tanks that don't fit on anybody's planes, but that's another story for another day. But there's a Department of Defense OSD level perspective that needs to be brought to bear on those things that apply across all the services: space, cyber, transportation, logistics. And because the services can't be trusted alone to decipher all that, and they have the purse strings.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Fish. I'd actually like to jump down to Maureen's question. Maureen, are you available to ask your question?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Do you still have your paintbrush? So when you aren't painting classrooms, and now that you've been out of uniform for the past several years, and congratulations on that, what would you say, and as you view corporate America and the way it does business, I imagine, I don't know what company you're affiliated with, but I'm sure that you're looking at life through a different lens now. And so my question is, what kinds of things are they doing in corporate America these days that you think we could bring back to the Department of Defense that we might benefit from, particularly in the logistics arena?
Yeah. So let me take that on. I'm affiliated with about 3 or 4 companies on their corporate board. And I will tell you that many times when I was in uniform, I always thought there were so many things that corporate America did better than us. And there are some things that they do, but let me tell you first a couple things that we do better than them. Here are a couple that are blatantly obvious. We do people development better, and we're not very good at it, but we're much better than corporate America. Corporate America does not invest in the development of their people because they just go buy new ones. We must develop our people because in order to get a 20-year senior NCO, you have to have developed them over 20 years. Corporate America will go purchase one from another company at the 20-year mark. So that's a difference in philosophy. The other is integrity. Not that everyone has integrity in the military, but we at least espouse it as part of our core, and we will most of the time take care of the people who don't just demonstrate integrity. In corporate America, sometimes if you demonstrate your ability to make more money, sometimes someone will turn a blind eye to your integrity. Okay, so so some things we do better. The things that they do better, it's focusing on what their bottom line is. Sometimes to their detriment. They know exactly which elements of the corporate strategy will make how much money in which quarter. And if you sit on a quarterly earnings call, not reaching the goal for that quarter is detrimental to just about everything. Our goals aren't that detrimental unless we go to war. So in a fight, we're much better than we are day to day when we're not fighting. When we're fighting each other for budget, it's a different story. But corporate America does a better focus on their core strategy, their core strengths, because it affects their bottom line. And if they don't meet the bottom line, they're no longer in business, or the CEO is no longer the CEO. I see General Hodge got his hand up over there. It's the first time I've ever noticed something in this chat thing.
Please, sir.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and thanks for your comments so far. Earlier in your comments, you asked us a rhetorical question about, what does it mean to be a citizen in this country, and that immediately caught my attention. And I started thinking about myself, and have I done enough, and have I done my role? And then I started asking, well, what exactly is my role as a citizen? And so, I guess my question back to you is the same question for today's citizen. When we look at some of those challenges that you laid out for us, like globalization and cyber and disinformation and the foreign and domestic enemies that we're faced with, what should today's citizen be doing today, to be a worthy citizen in this country?
Yeah, I wish I had that answer, but I have been thinking about it. And so one of the things I was thinking about is if you go back and somewhere on my desk, it looks like a bomb went off on it. Because I used to work by 3x5 cards. I'm getting older, so I work by 6x8 cards now, 5x8 cards now. I wrote down about 4 or 5 things that I think started to influence how we view citizenship in this country. And these are not necessarily things that I believe were detrimental or not, but it just shifted. Pledge of Allegiance, Lord's Prayer, Pledge of Allegiance. Now, do I believe we should put all of those back in schools? Not necessarily. But what I believe was when we took them out of schools, we took out some other discussion points with them. So we stopped talking about things like, what does it mean? I can vaguely remember talking about the elements of the pledge and what it meant. And it's not that we should say the pledge, but the elements of why the pledge exists are important discussion points. And it would be important to talk about, what does it mean if you're not Christian when you would say the Lord's Prayer? And what does it mean? And so understanding the groupings of Americans that are part of this fabric of this nation today, vice when all of those things existed. So we pull them out, and I'm not saying for good or bad reason, we just pulled them out. And then we didn't supplement the elements that we thought were core to citizenship. We put people that are not born here through more than we put people who are born here through, to learn about the country and understand the country. We force immigrants to know more about our country. When my daughter was a youngster, she attended a couple of Catholic elementary schools because she was ready, preschools, because she was ready to go to preschool long before there was a public school that was ready to take her. So we put her in the Catholic, and we're Baptists. And what I learned from one of the nuns was that the non-Catholics end up learning Catholicism better than the Catholics. Why? Because they come with a blank slate and they know nothing and they have to learn it all, whereas the Catholics think they already do. So apply that to American citizenship.
I had the same experiences traveling overseas to the UK, talking to the taxi drivers, and they know more about our government than I do, unfortunately.
I told the story yesterday that I wish many Americans could have followed me around when I was aide to the president. One of my stories I told yesterday was I was sitting in the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, and getting ready for a presidential visit before the Rabin's funeral. And at some point, a television was on. I'm in a room full of people that speak mainly Hebrew, very little English. And something had our national anthem on the TV. Everyone in the room stopped, turned towards the television, and believe it or not, many started to sing our national anthem in English. And that was the only words of English they knew. That just hit me in a way that I wish every American could feel.
Well, that's a great note to end on, since we're right at time. So, sir, thank you so much for your time and wisdom and your dedication to leading in general, and your words of pearls of wisdom is just priceless. Thank you, sir.
Well,
so
I don't know if I have pearls, but I have sand that could irritate you. And What I have is a series of opinions that are based on my perspective and my experience, and I'm not absolutely perfectly right. But I think the challenging discussion is important, and I wish I could have had it with you in person, and we could continue it at some point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.